Hello, welcome to the debate on Sky News. I'm Martin Stanford. Here's our take on developments brought together from America, the UK and around the world.
And that's why I stand here as confident as I have ever been that the state of our union is strong. Thank you.
State of what union? A verdict on the President's valedictory address. And Powerball crazy. But can a little flutter ever be completely just for fun?
Next number down is 19. That's followed by...
Well, it was his last big set-piece occasion as president. Did he make a lasting impression? In a moment, we will speak to Professor Jerry Mayer of George Mason University for his take on the last big speech of the Obama era. But first, let's bring in our regular guest. The Democrat commentator, Jeffrey Robinson, is standing by in New York, and Conservative commentator Armstrong Williams is in Washington, D.C. Jeffrey, what did you make of the speech?
I thought it was one of the best speeches of his presidency. I thought he really hit it out of the park. I liked it when he announced a new national initiative to fight cancer and said that Joe Biden was going to be in mission control. And at one point, Biden turned to Paul Ryan sitting next to him and said, "I didn't expect that." He was genuinely surprised. I liked it when he took on the Republicans who deny science and climate change by saying, when the Russians put Sputnik into space 60 years ago, we didn't deny it was up there. And what we did was we took it as a challenge and put a man on the moon 12 years later, saying, in other words, we can beat climate change. And I like the fact that he used the analogy with healthcare, saying the Republicans don't want healthcare, and yet the only people that he knows who have a 30-year job with healthcare and a retirement package are all sitting in this chamber. A direct hit at the Republicans. I particularly like one word that he used, which was fiction, which pretty much sums up the Republican stance on everything. And if you don't believe me, listen to the fiction from Armstrong.
Well, we could discuss all those points in a minute. Armstrong, do you think it gives him a purpose for these next few months?
Oh, he has a purpose. That is obvious. He's out on the campaign trail as we speak, touting his what he considered to be, in his own mind, his extraordinary State of the Union speech. You know, the president admitted that Congress is more divided and there's more rancor than ever. He mentioned the fact that maybe Lincoln and Roosevelt would have taken a different approach. And in a closing moment of the speech, he almost allowed himself to take some blame for the rancor and the divisiveness. He also talked about the failures in his own way of the Islamic State and the rise of ISIS, and the fact that things are not better off in the Middle East. It was almost an indictment of his own foreign policy. And he admitted the fact that he would be leaving the next administration burdened and saddled with those issues that can only get worse unless we confront them in a very meaningful way. What is interesting, though, what he echoed without calling Donald Trump's name was echoed by the governor of South Carolina, Nikki Haley. They did not want to, the president did not want to call his name, but they talked about the divisiveness, about what he said about Muslims and how he's very divisive in his remarks, and that's not who we are as Americans. I don't know whether President Obama was doing this because he really cares about the divisiveness in this country, or whether he's really trying to throw a bone to Hillary Clinton, who's now struggling to maintain her lead against candidate Bernie Sanders, which is almost shocking if you think about the fact that Bernie Sanders is gaining on her in the polls.
Armstrong, let's just run that clip, shall we? Just before we hear from Professor Mayer, let's hear the section of the speech where the president attacked the attacks on Muslims.
When politicians insult Muslims, whether abroad or our fellow citizens, when a mosque is vandalized or a kid is called names, that doesn't make us safer. That's not telling it like it is. It's just wrong. It diminishes us in the eyes of the world. It makes it harder to achieve our goals. It betrays who we are as a country.
Well, Professor Jeremy Mayer joins us now from George Mason University's School of Policy, Government and International Affairs. Professor, that was an attack on Donald Trump, wasn't it?
It absolutely was. And the question is, was he attacking Trump in order to elevate Trump strategically, or was he trying to really reach out to Republicans and have them come to their senses?
What do you think of the two?
Well, I think he really is being sincere. I think he is frightened by the popularity of Trump. I mean, we're talking about a man who has led one of our two major parties now consistently for months and months and months, and he's still leading in the polls nationally. I think the president really wants to wake up a large portion of Americans to the threat that Trump poses.
Do you think he will find any sympathy in Republican inclined voters by saying this?
Well, that's the problem, is he's so radioactive among Republicans that Trump is only helped by Obama attacking him, which is why I think the president didn't mention him by name. What could hurt Trump was the Republican response by Governor Haley. That type of persuasive, more gentle Republicanism might hurt Trump if it's consistently echoed by other figures in the party. But if you note, very few Republicans took up that banner today.
Armstrong, let me bring you in on that point because you mentioned it as well. Do you think this attitude of America to the Muslim faith internally and worldwide will remain a big issue in this forthcoming campaign?
It is the issue. You cannot escape it. It's all around us. Every time you turn around almost, there's a terrorist attack somewhere in the world. And what is really interesting, though, is that in order for the president or for the Republicans' message to really be effective with the American people, because it's obvious that the Republican establishment feels just as strongly about what Mr. Trump's divisiveness as the president himself, you've got to balance it out and talking about there is extremism. There is this terrorism that is a threat. And Muslims are our brothers, and we should not paint them with a broad brush. But we do expect them to condemn this kind of behavior. And the president having someone like CARE, who it has been known and traceable that they fund some of these terrorist organizations and touting them as some organization that we should admire and respect, it could easily become an ad for someone like a Donald Trump. It could backfire. And then also, Donald Trump is very clever. I've never seen anybody who is masterful as he is in turning the tables on the media. And even he and many of the people are disgruntled over this election because of the establishment. The president is the establishment. Governor Haley is the establishment. He could certainly take this kind of message from the president last night to say they're against me and use it as an ad and use it as more fuel for him to continue what he's doing with a more range of support. Because listen, his support is not just isolated to Republicans. There are Democrats who will privately tell you that they like what Trump is saying, but they just wish he would say it better.
And Jeffrey, in that context, how does the more moderate voice ever get heard during this forthcoming election process?
It doesn't. It simply doesn't. And as for Armstrong's moderate Republicans, you won't find moderate Democrats. You won't find a sober one supporting Trump. You hardly find a big swath of real Republicans, not his right-wing constituents, but the real Republican Party. There are 60 to 65% who are saying no to Donald Trump, as opposed to the 35 who are supporting him. And when push comes to shove, he's going to have a real hard time getting elected. He'll have a hard time getting the nomination because the mainstream Republican Party doesn't want him, and the country will reject him. The point is that Governor Haley is pretending to be a moderate so she can get on the ticket with somebody as vice presidential candidate. Don't forget, she was elected by the Tea Party. She's a right-wing conservative bigot governor who has absolutely denied most of her citizens their basic rights to things like health care. She's as disgraceful as the rest of the Republican governors. So we're not going to paint Governor Haley as a heroine. The one thing she did was take down the Confederate flag. That's to her credit, but she's done nothing else to deserve any praise.
I think the professor is illustrating exactly how the Democratic Party is becoming almost as crazy and extreme as the Republican Party in response. That kind of rhetoric about Governor Haley is simply out of bounds. She's
Not
not
at all.
some wild-eyed Tea Party crazy. She's
She was
taken
elected
some
by it.
very conservative stances, but in the context of the modern Republican Party, she's very much in the establishment. And I think she'd be a very smart choice for Rubio as a vice presidential candidate, or Kasich.
Rubio and Kasich don't stand a chance. Rubio is running for high school prom chairman, and Kasich couldn't get elected because he did the right thing when it came to Medicare and the people of his state. No, she's a Tea Party candidate, a wolf in sheep's clothing. You're a fool if you think otherwise.
Let me ask the professor about the nature of the discourse here. We've seen it in the month so far, and it's not getting any better, is it, in the aftermath of the president's final State of the Union address. Is there any place in the discourse in the next few months for a more moderate, inclusive attitude to politics in America generally?
Yeah, I think we're waiting for the Ross Perot moment over NAFTA. And many of you won't recall, but in 1993, Al Gore took on Ross Perot, who was a populist, certainly no Donald Trump. He was a much more urbane and sophisticated person intellectually. But he was also kind of a blowhard on trade. And Al Gore sat down with him on a television show and in 45 minutes dismantled the man. It revealed him to be uninformed. And it might happen in a Republican debate when it gets down to just 2 or 3 people in Trump. Trump can survive when it's 10 people or 8 people on stage, but he has so little substance to his policy positions that when it gets down to just a 2-person debate, I hope that America will see that the man lacks substance and is simply an archetype of hate.
Let me just pause now and focus on a moment when the president reiterated his belief that ISIL should be fought on the ground if necessary.
If this Congress is serious about winning this war and wants to send a message to our troops and the world, authorize the use of military force against ISIL. Take a vote. If you doubt America's commitment, or mine, to see that justice is done, just ask Osama bin Laden.
Well, Professor, that did rather serve to indicate how difficult this president has found doing many things completely, or particularly as he's at odds with Congress on so many matters.
Well, I think specifically on that point, it's Congress that has dropped the ball. They don't want to take a vote on use of force because they don't want to take responsibility for anything that the president does or does not do. If he asks for support and they don't give it, then they're to blame if he should have done it. And if he asks for support and they give it, then they're to blame if what he does goes wrong. So this Congress, primarily on the Republican side, but also some of the Democrats, don't want to take a vote that will be hard. They'd rather Obama just take all the responsibility. It's a very few senators like Tim Kaine who've stood up and said, no, we're the Congress. We should take this vote.
Armstrong, what do you think about the military action question?
Look, I think the professor and I might just find some common ground on this. And what she's saying, yeah, there is truth to it. But there's a bigger story here. Most of our generals at home and abroad, whether it's to the president, whether it's Republicans and Democrats in Congress, caution against us putting troops on the ground. Why? Because ISIL and ISIS would like nothing more than to put American troops on the ground so they could kidnap them, torture them, and make them a part of their new videos. And it's just not a good idea to have Westerners fighting on the ground against Muslims. If you're going to create that kind of scenario, they should fight against each other. You should use the Kurds and the other options that we have in that region. They just don't think. And listen, I have, as a journalist and a broadcast owner, have had conversations with these generals, and they make it very clear that putting American troops on the ground will backfire and become something that the American people cannot stomach because of what ISIS would like to do with captured Americans to make an example out of them.
Jeffrey?
I agree absolutely with what Armstrong's saying, but to be clear, what the president asked for, a use of force, does not mean ground troops. It simply means that our ongoing action in Syria and Iraq against ISIS would then have the support of the Congress. Right now, the president is doing it under the authority of the use of force resolutions that authorized Iraq and the use of force resolution that authorized the war against al-Qaeda, on September 14th, 2001. So we need a new use of force resolution to firmly say that the legislative body is behind the fight against ISIS.
Jeffrey?
Yes, absolutely. I agree with both of them. It's nice to see that Armstrong suddenly got in religion, because less than a month ago, he was sitting on the same program saying the only way to win is to send in ground forces. I mean, obviously, it's not the way to win. If ground forces go in, it's got to be Muslim Arab ground forces from the Arab nations, Saudi in particular, Egypt perhaps, a few other countries who are supposed to be our coalition partners in this. But it would be suicide to send in American troops, and I don't think anybody wants it. The Republican Congress is simply shirking its duty, as it has for the last 8 years. Don't forget that the now leader of the Senate, then minority leader of the Senate, said on the first day of Obama's presidency, my job is to make sure he's a one-term president. That's disgraceful and typical of what the Republican attitude towards this president has been.
Could I just get one take from each of you, if I could, on the cancer job he's given to Joe Biden? That's a bit of visionary thinking, Jeffrey, isn't it? Sets something, I suppose, to inspire people.
Yes, and it's reminiscent of Kennedy's putting a man on the moon speech. What he did, especially with Biden, and it's now come out that when Beau took ill, Obama went to Biden right away and said, if you need any financial help, we're here to help with whatever the costs are. I mean, he did that as a personal friendship to Joe Biden, who's been a loyal servant of the American people and a great vice president. Hopefully that will be a rallying call. It would be great 10 years from now to say, we did it. We've solved the problem.
Yeah, Armstrong, it'd be some legacy, wouldn't it?
You know what? Those kinds of moments are very important for the optics, because, you know, while people may think that the Bidens are wealthy, and they probably are, it's not about whether the Bidens have wealth or not. It's the fact that the president shows his heart. He shows his compassion for a friend who lost someone in a very devastating way. And so it reminds the American people, despite our politics and our differences, we must find the best in each other, empower each other, and uplift each other, especially when it comes to these kinds of crises like health. And so many of Americans and people around the world die of cancer today, and unfortunately, we're no closer to a cure than we were 10 or 15 years ago.
Professor, I guess with so many things unresolved, gun control not really sorted, Guantanamo still working, although he did say, let's see if we can shut it in the next year. If America could make real advancements in the cure of cancer, that would be something for the Obama legacy, would it not?
It would, but I hate to be the skunk at the garden party on this point, but he's not the first president to commit to fighting cancer in a State of the Union. Other presidents have said we'll spend billions on this, and cancer is a very tough thing to crack. I hope it ends up like Kennedy and the man on the moon in 10 years, but we have a National Cancer Institute, we have the NIH, we're already spending billions on the cancer fight. If what this speech means is that he can get Congress to commit another billion, another $2 billion over the next year or two, that will mean something. But I don't think Joe Biden is going to lead us to a great breakthrough in the next 11 months.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor.
Thank you.
Now, as we record this show, it's Wednesday afternoon, so we don't know the result of the latest rollover in a lottery called Powerball. An executive from the Texas Lottery said that at peak traffic, they were selling $1.2 million worth of tickets every minute when it was last drawn, when, of course, they didn't get the result. Now, statisticians have put the chances of a win tonight as similar to flipping a coin and getting heads 28 times in a row. So small, is it worth it? And in any case, is it healthy? Well, Keith White is from the National Council on Problem Gambling. Is there any such thing, Keith, as a casual flutter like this big lottery?
There is certainly such a thing as a casual flutter. We know that for the vast majority of people, playing the lottery is a recreational activity. Our concern is, of course, the reasons that people play. So if you're playing as a means of investment, if you're playing as a means of paying the bills, or if you're playing, most importantly, as a means of escaping pain or stress in your life, those are all signs that you may have a gambling problem.
And does the one necessarily lead to the other?
Everyone starts out for fun. No one starts out to become addicted. And we know how and why you start is important. So if you receive a lottery ticket as a gift as a child, later on in life, if you have a gambling problem, you're more likely to have a severe problem.
And in that sense, Keith, can any one of us fall prey to a gambling problem, or are there certain personality types which are more likely to have a problem with gambling?
For most people, it's lower risk, and we do know conversely that there are people who are at higher risk, and those groups include young males between 18 to 24, people who are using and abusing other substances or other addictive activities, and especially people with a family history of addiction. So in other words, if you had a problem gambler in your immediate family, you're 7 times more likely to have a gambling problem yourself. If you had an alcoholic or a drug addict in your family, your rates are also higher. So we know that it's both the psychology, it's your environment, it's how and why you gamble, and there is certainly genetic risk factors.
I was reporting from Las Vegas on another program last week, so of course that is a gambling den, isn't it? There are the horses. What type of gambling is more difficult to manage compared to, say, a flutter on the lottery?
When you look at the structural characteristics of the games, those really determine some of the more addictive factors, and then those intersect with the individual's own biology and psychology. But again, for most people, slot machines, in other words, high speed of play, very, very large prizes often, frequent winnings, those seem to be factors that are associated with gambling addiction and sort of the majority of people that are seeking help.
Let me bring in Armstrong and Jeffrey, who are back with us for now. Armstrong, let me go to you first. I don't know, do you use the lottery? Do you have a little flutter on the lottery, or is it not something that interests you?
You know, how can you not play a $1 billion lottery? I mean, are you kidding me? I mean, while the chances are probably 1 in a zillion, I mean, you may just have the number. I mean, some people may say it's $2, but look, I don't think you have a choice but to play it.
Jeffrey, do you ever buy the lottery ticket? Do you do it weekly or just on these big occasions?
Yeah, well, first of all, Keith's message about compulsive gambling is very, very, very important because it's a serious problem. I mean, a truly serious problem with tragic consequences and needs to be addressed. Yeah, I play. In fact, every week I put my $2 down on a Powerball, and I actually choose the correct numbers. It's the Powerball people who draw the wrong numbers. But I figured it out. This time I took real interest once it passed $1 billion, and it's up to $1.5 billion now, and probably will go higher by the time it's drawn tonight. I figured out I can guarantee how to win. I mean, I worked it out, and mathematically you cannot lose. And here's the solution. The odds are, if you choose every single number in every combination, the odds are about 261, something like that, 261 million to 1. So at $2 a shot, for $520 million, if you happen to have spare change, you can pull every number and are guaranteed to win the $1.5 billion. The problem is that Armstrong's going to spend $260 or $520 million, and you're going to have to share it with him. In the end, it's a loser, and gamblers always lose, never, ever win. No gambler, no compulsive gambler has ever come out ahead, ever.
Keith, where are you in terms of the education? Because the education of the young is a mammoth challenge, because I suppose gambling, taking a chance, taking a risk, that's part of growing up, isn't it?
It's not only part of growing up, but I would argue it's part of our DNA. I think Americans have always been more prone to taking risks. We've been soldiers and warriors and entrepreneurs. So I think it's baked into the American psyche, and I think that serves us well in a lot of areas. With gambling, and especially with state-sponsored gambling, it can be a little bit tricky. So we urge that there be broad public education and prevention and treatment programs, but unfortunately, and it's unbelievable, in a number of states, there's no funding whatsoever. So there are states that are raking in hundreds of millions of dollars from their lotteries every year and not putting a single penny of it back into prevention or treatment. The federal government doesn't routinely spend a single cent. And so there are huge gaps in our safety system.
Jeffrey, that's a problem, isn't it, really? Because it's kind of, as you're intimating, of course, it's a manly thing, it's an expected thing. Of course, you're going to have a little go at this. But for those who fall between the cracks and get into trouble with it, there isn't much sympathy.
It's a disease, actually, and there should be a lot of sympathy, and there are things that you can do. I mean, Gamblers Anonymous is a terrific organization, much like Alcoholics Anonymous, and people who have a problem really should seek help. As a journalist, many years ago, 40 years ago, I covered a meeting of Gamblers Anonymous, and I can tell you it was the most depressing night of my life, because normal, ordinary people sat there and explained their story and said, I hit my little old grandmother over the head to steal her television so I could put a bet down on some horses, won, and immediately put that money back in, because winning is not what it's all about. It's the rush, it's the gambling, and lost the money. Tragic stories, and people who have that problem need to get help. I might point out that Jeb Bush, when he was governor of Florida, started the state lotto in Florida, promising to put that money into education. And he did. But what he did was he took the state budget for education, took that money out of the budget, and substituted the lotto money. So nobody won. Absolutely nobody won.
And can it be a time like this, Keith, that actually triggers that person in need to reach out to somebody like yourself?
Absolutely. This is a very teachable moment. And as Jeffrey said, this is a conversation we have 365 days of the year. But if it's just a conversation that we can reach people now with this high jackpot, there is an enormous opportunity to help people. But at the same time, let's say you're trying to recover from a gambling problem, just the bombardment of messages, the relentless promotion can trigger relapse. So I think for someone in recovery from a problem, this is a really tough time. And the longer this crescendo goes, the more pressure it is on them, because many of them feel they're only one better way from winning everything back. And a life-changing jackpot like this, where they think, well, I've already lost millions of dollars, why shouldn't I change my life? Aren't I due? I need to be due. I have to be due. And so, again, it's a teachable moment. Our website is ncpgambling.org. It's almost been crushed by the increased traffic. Our helpline, we had 276,000 calls last year to that line alone. It's 800-522-4700. And our helpline has seen also a huge surge this week.
Keith White, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Hey, thank you, Martin. Cheers.
And that's it for this edition of The Debate. You can continue watching Sky News on Apple TV, on Roku and Catch Up, and of course at skynews.com. Until next time, goodbye.